Hi everybody, welcome to the March 11th show of Coast to Coast. It's actually aired on March 10th. If you go to Mr. Super Potato Tomato on YouTube channel, it would be the March 10th show. This would be the third hour, right? This would be the third hour, the first part of it. Alright? We are talking about history and the future, and how they relate due to the same people being in charge the whole time, calling the shots that we will all have to live under. I'm going to have to take a look to see if there's anything in the ground at this last job, because it doesn't look like it, but there might be a conduit. I'm just going to take a look at one page, and then we'll be on our way. We are currently in East Hampton, and we are going to a different part of East Hampton from here. Alright? I love you all, and here we go.
John Scura, author of Battle Hymn. You know, somebody just sent an email that I'll we'll just take another little side trip and then get back on the track that we were on. But she writes, I'm one of those people that have been taught don't bring up politics or religion because it causes adverse discourse. And now the danger that is lurking because people haven't been discussing these things realistically with each other may be our downfall.
Of course.
You know, there's a story.
They told you not to talk about it.
From Dr. Seuss.
Because they didn't want everybody finding out.
Ferguson calls Dr. Seuss.
That most of us are on the same page.
Of the name, but it would be Dr. Seuss. I don't remember the name of the story, but I remember there was this turtle wanted to be the king. And so he made all the other turtles stack up on each other's back so he could be way up high there. And his downfall was the one on the bottom who burped. And his burp shook the throne of the king, and he came tumbling down. Now he's king of the mud, for that's all he can see. So, John, do you have any idea that, all right, let me put it another way. What can the citizenry do to thwart this initiative by these very highly organized, very connected, very well-funded organizations?
Well, my first target would be the Federal Reserve System, with which Americans were saddled in 1913 and has been a blight on this country ever since. I could give you a bit of history of it.
Please. Absolutely.
Yeah, the central banks, first of all, central banks are nothing new in America. That, when we were a British colony, we used to print our own money. It's called colonial scrip. And it was printed according to the demands of trade and industry, and it was done without charging any interest. This changed with the Currency Act of 1764, which was forced upon the colonials by British Parliament at the urging of the Bank of England. Suddenly, colonists had to accept British currency and pay interest on it. It caused an economic depression and unemployment. And Benjamin Franklin maintained that this was the principal cause of the revolution. Okay, so we win the revolution, we kick England out of here. Who comes along but Alexander Hamilton? He wants to create a central bank overseen by a wealthy elite class. His opponents accused Hamilton of being an agent of international bankers. Thomas Jefferson was among the accusers. But he succeeded, and the Bank of North America was created in 1781. It practiced what is called fractional reserve banking, which simply is lending money it does not possess at interest. In other words, banking typically is a scam, and when you do it on the national level, you get to make an awful lot of money. The new bank was currency, which immediately plummeted in value. 4 years later, Congress refused to renew the Bank of North America, and due to ruinous inflation and fraudulent practices, Hamilton didn't give up. He went at it again and established another central bank in 1791, First Bank of the United States. About 80% of its capital came from private investors, among them foreign bankers like the Rothschilds. The new bank soon became Pathans. It just soon followed the same path as its predecessor. Created inflation in which prices rose 72% in 5 years. After 20 years of causing ruin in America, the bank came up for renewal in 1811, and the charter was defeated, obviously, in Congress. Nathan Rothschild, who was he wasn't running the Bank of England yet, but he was well established in England. He made a threat. He said either the application of the charter is granted or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. Well, the War of 1812 took place, and it did spell disaster for this nation. It drained its treasury and destroyed the national credit standing, and we simply had to renew a central bank charter because of it. This occurred in 1816, and the government issued a new 20-year charter to the Second Bank of the United States. The new charter was identical to the previous one, meaning 80% of the prime stockholders were private investors, many of them foreign. Now, along comes Andrew Jackson in 1828. He wins the election. He makes no secret of his opposition to any American central bank, but the current charter is not going to expire until 1836, which would be at the end of a second term if Jackson were reelected. So, in the meantime, what Jackson did was eliminate the bankers' representatives from government service. He fired 2,000 of them out of a total of 11,000 federal government employees.
You go, Jackson.
He won re-election in a landslide in 1832, and then he right away went to work, and he removed government deposits from the Second Bank and placed them in the state banks. Second Bank president named Nicholas Biddle, who was an agent of Jacob Rothschild in Paris, according to author Eustace Mullins, immediately threatened to create a depression by making money scarce if the charter was not renewed. Biddle called in loans while refusing to extend new ones, and it caused financial panic and the depression that he promised. Biddle blamed Jackson for the disaster, and the press bought it. So Congress convened and actually, it was called, what historians call the panic session, actually censured Jackson. First time an American president was ever censured by Congress. But Biddle's boasts finally got to him and turned Congress against him. And the Second Bank Charter finally was not renewed. A year later, Jackson survives an assassination attempt by a mentally ill painter named Richard Lawrence. When both Lawrence's new pistols misfired at point-blank range, I mean, talk about divine intervention. Lawrence was subdued by a group of bystanders. One of them was Congressman Davy Crockett. In his trial, Lawrence received a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, despite the attempts of prosecutor Francis Scott Key, the writer of our national anthem, to stress that Lawrence had lived in England and had boasted that he was, quote, in touch with the powers in Europe. Anyway, Jackson finished his second term, and at the end of the second term, the national debt was entirely paid, and the government was running on surplus that allowed the next president, Martin Van Buren, to distribute funds to the states. I mean, everything was wonderful. So you could see the advantage of not having a central bank. This arrangement, in which the U.S. Treasury Department printed American currency without charging interest, continued into the next century, despite repeated attempts by European bankers to create economic chaos. These attempts are known today as bank panics of 1873, 1893, and 1907, all of them deliberately created by international bankers who retracted loans and refused to grant new ones. That's what they do every time. That will cause chaos. The Panic of 1907 was clearly instigated by J.P. Morgan as an agent of the Rothschilds. It destroyed a number of American banks and seemed to some a lesson that the U.S. needs a central bank. Okay, so we have now a move toward that, which I have to say, and this was not my word, a conspiracy. It was admitted by the people who were involved at this secret meeting in 1910, called by Senate Republican leader Nelson Aldrich. All of these wealthy bankers met together at a posh resort in 1910 on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. Aldrich had spent the previous 2 years studying Germany's central bank system, and one of the shining lights of that system, Paul Warburg, a German banker, ran the meetings. These meetings were so secretive that only first names were used, and new servants were hired at the resort who did not know the participants. The banking families hatched a plan to ram a central banking act through Congress, which in 1913 would become the Federal Reserve System. A huge propaganda campaign was launched through bribed newspaper editors and publishers, and through academics, one of them being a certain professor at Princeton named Woodrow Wilson. Now, Wilson finally gained the White House in 1912 election. He was the bankers' candidate. They knew he was going to okay and get the Federal Reserve passed through. He was running against the incumbent, though, William Howard Taft, who was opposed to the banking bill. And Wilson's chances were pretty poor until the bankers decided to convince Teddy Roosevelt to run for the presidency in a new progressive party funded by Morgan executives. Roosevelt stole votes from Taft and Wilson won. So here we have Wilson in the White House now, and despite fierce resistance from congressmen like Charles Lindbergh Sr., Louis McFadden, Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. There is some question about the ratification of this act, as a congressional vote was held just 2 days before Christmas of that year, when many of the lawmakers were not present. One rumor claimed that there were just 3 senators present for this vote, which is not a quorum, obviously. We called the Library of Congress, trying to find out, a record of the ayes and nays on this vote, and we were astonished to learn that the record of this vote was missing.
Missing?
It was missing, yes. Later on, another of the persons in the Library of Congress said, "Oh no, we found it now, and here's a big tally of the vote." I just thought it was very suspicious that, it was missing at first and all of a sudden turns up. Anyway, following his passage, Lindbergh Sr. Glumly predicted, quote, "From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. The invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized." Now, near the end of his last term, Wilson admitted, too late, "I have unwittingly ruined my country. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." So now we have the Federal Reserve System intact. What is it? Well, first of all, it's not a part of the federal government. It's amazing how many Americans do not know that.
Are there stockholders in this bank, John? I mean, if it's a private bank, who owns the stock in the thing?
It is a privately held corporation consisting of 12 Federal Reserve banks serving different parts of our country. The Federal Reserve Boards of Governors is an independent agency that receives no congressional funding, so therefore they're not answerable to Congress. They have 7 members whose terms of service often are longer than those of our presidents. Now,
let me agonize over this for a second. These people control the monetary policy of this country, but they're not accountable to anybody?
Not to anybody. In fact,
All right, we were going to pick up on that. On the flip side, you've been listening to Mike Island, Life at 55. Actually, right now it's Life at 40. I tell you every time, I hope you guys are learning it. Breathe deep, tone, communication with your fellow human. With all the texting and twittering and tweeping and twerk, everybody's forgetting how to actually talk to people. But it's a big part of life, and hopefully you will not continue to abdicate your responsibilities as a human to have a conversation. It's what separates us from the animals. Kind of. Alright, I love you all. Have a beautiful day. LIVINOW.